Why is it that we struggle so to confess our sin? I suggest there are a few basic barriers to confession. One would be run-of-the-mill human pride. Directly, in the sense that we just don't want to admit when there's something wrong. We don't like entertaining the notion that we are deeply mistaken, or even worse, that we are wrong morally. Or maybe it takes on a different shape, and it's the prideful belief that generally we shouldn't have problems. We shouldn't be affected by things. This can be really, really difficult if you are in a position where you are responsible for other people, right? Because one of the things that'll come in there that seems to be very godly, that seems to be very responsible, is this idea that I want to be an anchor and a rock for the people who depend on me. That seems good, doesn't it? It's not a very far step from that to nothing should be wrong with me. Nothing should bother me. So this can happen for a pastor, for example. I should not ever be frustrated. I'm supposed to be tending to the people of God. I'm supposed to be pouring myself out for the people of God. I'm supposed to be shepherding with compassion and patience. And there's this picture of who I'm supposed to be. And that's fine. That's something to aspire to. And then that can go to a place of, and therefore, there should never be a problem with Pastor Brian. And that's obviously not true. And what that is then is stubbornness. It is the prideful belief that I just shouldn't be affected as a mere mortal by the things that affect us. Sometimes we don't confess because we are afraid. We are afraid that if we stop hiding from whatever it is we're hiding from, and we acknowledge it, that will somehow destroy us. Maybe that comes in the form of we think that if people knew such and such, whatever, X, Y, Z about me, then they would reject me. And so we are afraid. Or maybe it is just the simple fear of failure. We think, or we are afraid that to admit a real fault is a failure. And you know the dumbest thing about that is that to really, truly admit a real fault, do you think that's a failure? Have you ever had somebody come to you humbly, trusting you, and confess something real to you? And have you thought, what a failure? Or have you thought, wow, the courage that it took to actually acknowledge that and share that with me seems to me to be a huge step in the right direction. Do you see that? And then somehow when it comes to us, ourselves, then we think, no. If I admit a fault, it's a failure. There's an idea in exercise that's really, really important. And it's something I didn't understand for a long time. When you do any kind of physical exercise, you're trying to get healthier, you actually have to push your body, right? Which means you push your body and run the risk of failure. Yes? I mean, anybody who's ever done any weightlifting, that's like kind of the point. You lift something until you can't do it again. i.e., you do something until you fail. And it's not until that moment that you actually grow. It's at the point where you're able to face failure, then your body will adapt to whatever in the world you're trying to put it through. And I suggest the same thing is true spiritually. It's that to confess, to acknowledge a real fault is not failure. In fact, it's the only path to success. It's the only path to growth. And lastly, a barrier that I think we have with confession is shame. And this is very closely connected with fear. But shame it's not just that people will reject me. It's specifically the notion that I will be humiliated if I say this out loud, because this thing will be the final word on who I am. So let me give an example of how this sometimes works for me. If I get into an argument with my wife, a defensive mechanism that will arise within my heart is I don't want to acknowledge that I'm just flat wrong. And again, I know that nobody else knows anything about this and you can't help me, but what happens is, if I'm honest, specifically, I think if I acknowledge that I'm wrong here, then it's going to be just like I'm just generally wrong. Do you see that? Like if I acknowledge that I'm in the wrong here, then it will mean that nothing that I ever have to say will be worth anything at all. Because the fact that I'm wrong here will become the final word on anything that I have to contribute. And you're listening to that and you're like, Pastor Brian, that's stupid. Yeah, sure sounds dumb right now when I say it. But that's the truth. And that's the shame. We think, we are afraid, maybe it's not even that we think, it's that we fear that our sin will just be the final word, the sum total of who we are. And so we don't want to say it out loud. We don't want to face reality. We want to pretend that nothing's wrong. We want to pretend that everything's all right instead of facing the truth.